All right, can we get started with this session? We will get going. I was really excited, actually, when I was invited to introduce these three scholars because all three of them have helped facilitate my research and have helped me do better at what I'm trying to do. And so I'm hoping that they can share ways with you that they can facilitate your research. And the title of this session is really intriguing, and so I'm hoping that they will take some time to explain that. I'm going to just introduce them very briefly because they're going to take some time to introduce themselves, and I'm going to do it all at once so that they can work back and forth as a panel to share information with you. But these individuals, in the middle is David Taylor, who got graduate degrees from the University of Indiana, and Tyson Thorpe at the end did his graduate work from Brigham Young University. San Jose State, thank you. He got a master's in library sciences. And Jay here, you know already because he just got the award for the best anthology. So he's doing some really great work. And I will turn the time over to Jay first to explain the title and then go from there in sharing with us what they have to offer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. So, a product manager, a reference librarian, and an archivist walked into a bar. And I thought about this when I came up with the title, and I thought, So we could go the route and talk about like the panda bear that eats shoots and leaves, and go that way. Or one of my favorites is that after they walk into the bar, the bartender looks up and says, "Well, why didn't you duck, you stupids?" But the reality is two scenarios. One is immediately after we walked into a bar, we remembered that we were Latter-day Saints from Utah, so we turned around and walked right back out. And the other realization is that it turns out that when the product manager, the reference librarian, and the archivist walked into a bar, if you look to your left over there, the bar is where we gave our presentation. So here we are. We'll start off with David Taylor, and we'll work through our show.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, my name is David Taylor. I work for the Church History Library in Salt Lake City. I am a technical product manager responsible for our online church history catalog and other products. And we're excited to be here today. This is my first time at John Whitmer Historical Association conference, and it's been a pleasure to begin to mingle and to get to know some of you and to participate and watch the sessions. I also want to take just a moment to just a shout out to all the librarians and archivists and record keepers of all the various traditions that allow historians to do their work. In particular, for me, Rachel Killebrew has been very helpful these last few months as I've been doing some research, and she's so useful and responsive, and it's really great. So our objective here today at the beginning is to highlight the church history catalog and how it can be a valuable resource to researchers of early restoration groups. I do have a demo at one point, and in order to hopefully avoid technical difficulties, I pre-recorded the video, and so hopefully that will go well. But there will be a moment we'll all take a break and we'll watch, listen to me, a pre-recorded version of me. So the Church History Library, this is the building where the Church History Library is housed in Salt Lake City, Utah, if you have not been there before. It is a part corporate archive, part research library, and part special collections library. And to give you an idea of the scope and size of our collection, let's see, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We can see here kind of an overview of the types of records that we have, over 200,000 books and published materials, including newspapers, and over 200,000 collections of archival content, original manuscripts, photographs, correspondence, et cetera, including a large number of audiovisual items. And About 5 years ago, we embarked in a journey to update our cataloging systems. And that journey was guided by two main principles. One was self-guided discovery, and second was online digital delivery of those materials. The vision was a single repository, a single place where someone could go and search for published materials and archival holdings, and then to be able to see digital content, whether that's images or audio or video, and can all be accessed quickly within the context of that catalog record. On screen here, we see a photograph of the Lyman White's foundation of Lyman White's Rock House that was taken about 1920. So this is the homepage of the Church History Catalog. I failed to put the URL on this slide, and I apologize. It is catalog.churchofjesuschrist.org, or if you simply go to your Google and type in Church History Catalog, it'll be the very top hit, so you can find it quite easily. There's a couple of points, areas on this homepage that I want to highlight for you. The first is up in the top right corner, right below where you can sign in. You have the Ask Us link, and under Ask Us, there's a form that you can fill out to ask questions or request assistance from our consultation team. We'll hear a little bit more about that from Tyson in a little bit. And it's also where you can request digitization of materials. The help link has some frequently asked, or some answers to frequently asked questions, and can be a very useful beginning. Also, right there in the middle, there are some other resources that you shouldn't skip over. The Getting Started has a great overview and orientation to the catalog, as well as introduction to the materials in our collection. And then the middle link provides a series of topical research guides. So even experienced research, I think, can benefit from going to those research guides and seeing some key collections that will be very useful. And if your primary interest is in family history research, those resources and research guides are also available in that last link there. I also want to draw your attention to the little drop arrow menu just to the left of the search bar. If you just type in a search with the any selected, which is the default, it will do a keyword search on any of the materials in any of the catalog records. But if you click there first, it provides a pre-filter. Here's a little insider tip. I do not recommend using the title, author, or subject searches. They just don't work very well. We're hoping to fix that, improve that next year. But if you do know the call number, that can be a really fast way to find something. You can usually find the call number just doing any search as well. But if you were, for example, in Alex Baugh's presentation earlier, he referenced some of the materials there, CR 100/93. You can type that in as the call number and find it very, very quickly exactly what you're looking for. Also, one of my personal favorites is the church periodicals. So if you are looking for periodicals printed and produced, so newspapers or magazines produced by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I highly recommend you pre-filter by church periodicals. So if you're looking for the Evening and the Morning Star, or any other, the Millennial Star, or many other early periodicals, this would be a fantastic way of finding that. Just to note that if there are periodicals produced by other organizations, they would not be found using the church periodical pre-filter search. So now we're going to go into a demonstration. It's about a 4-minute video that will walk you through by searching for some collections that might be of interest and kind of highlight some of the various tools and resources that are available in the catalog. So speaking of other periodicals, let's say I'm searching for digital copies of the Saints Herald, the official periodical of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Doing a simple keyword search gives me nearly 3,000 results. So instead, I want to narrow my results over here with these facets. So if I filter using digital and then apply filter, that brings me down to 400. There certainly are some interesting ones here. But I want to narrow even further. I'm going to do that by using this subject right here. There's 8. Apply filters. So another time you can explore these, we have births and blessings, marriages, anniversaries, obituaries. This is a great collection that we'll highlight a little bit later. We're going to come back and talk about some of these visual indicators, about explain our access policy. And here I see something called the Herald, but under this I see a title note. It used to be known as the True Latter-day Saints Herald, then the Saints Herald, then simply Saints Herald before becoming Community of Christ Herald. So I'm going to click on this. This is what clearly designates us as digital. That means there's some digital content that can be viewed online without having to go into the library. You can click on the thumbnail or on the title in order to go into the collection. This clearly is a collection of items, and we use that term for, well, you can learn more about that right over here. So we come into this, we're taken to the Browse Collection view. We also see that there's an About the Collection tab, and this has all of the metadata and from the catalog record. Typically, if it were an archival collection of a unique collection, I should say, rather than a periodical, we would have some useful information in the summary right over here. So we're going to focus on our Browse collection. You can see there's kind of a lot going on. Let's just work our way left to right. Over here this allows us to browse the collection contents. It's a finding aid, kind of a navigation tree. In this case with a periodical, it's simply organized by date. And so I can narrow things down by simply expanding out. If I want to look at 1871 to 1880, I click the arrow to expand out. Now I can click the arrow next to 1875 and expand and see all of the issues for 1875. I'm interested in the March 15th, 1875 issue. Simply hover over it anywhere in this line and then click on it. And now over on the right-hand side, it has narrowed this down to simply the one issue. What's a little bit unique about this, about the church history catalog, is that the navigation tree also acts as a filter. So if I want to see all of the issues from 1875, I can come up here and click on 1875. Again, not on the arrow, but anywhere else on that row. And now I'm seeing all of the issues for 1875. It shows that it's displaying 10 items, that there are a total of 24. And I can kind of browse down through these. I can change this if I want to see 20 items or 50 items. As you see the thumbnails, you can hover over and you get a slightly larger image. You can browse through by clicking this arrow and it will advance 5 or 6 images. And you can go into the media viewer by either clicking on a particular image or clicking over here on Open in Viewer. But I want to show you one of the things that I think is really, really helpful, especially if you've got a folder of content, or in this case, issues of a newspaper that you really want to kind of not browse through every single page. Right here, you have this inconspicuous thing called Arrangement View. This is the default view, which displays how the collection is arranged. But if I choose a down arrow, I can go to the Gallery View. Gallery View is really like a grid view. So here I'm seeing the thumbnails. It shows the first 25 thumbnails of each folder of content, or in this case, each issue. If I want to see more, I can just click on still the next 25 more, or just do View All. Now I'm seeing all of them, and I'm like, this looks like exactly what I want. I can click on that, and now I'm taken into the All right, let's jump over to, so that is, we do have, several years back, we had a wonderful partnership with the Community of Christ in which we digitized many of their records. Again, I think we'll highlight one of those other collections in a moment, which includes, well, I think we'll get there. So let's jump over into a different collection to highlight the media viewer itself and what you can do there. So here is another example of, we have many early hymn books from different traditions in our catalog and in our collection. And so I'm just going to use this as an example to kind of highlight some of the functionality of the media viewer. So let's see. So this one, as I mentioned, was from the Bickerton branch of the church. I think a lot of the features of the viewer are pretty common or intuitive, but there's a couple of tips that I want to share. So you'll notice there's the left and right navigation arrows that are right on the screen. That allows you to kind of just browse back and forth of the various pages, again, in that that digital folder, whether it's a book or a periodical or whatever it may be it's been grouped together in that way. Up at the top, we have some other tools. We see that we're on image number 5 out of 386. You actually can type in a page to jump to another page in that collection. And then across the top, we have these tools here. We can zoom in or out. We also can rotate left and right. We can expand to full screen. And these next two are kind of shortcuts for either fit to the width or fit to the height of your screen. The last one allows you to invert the image. It's particularly useful if you've got faint handwriting, and we'll see what that looks like in just a moment. Over on the right is some additional metadata in this panel and some other tools that I'm not going to get into today, but happy if you have some to talk to you if you have questions about that afterwards. This is what it looks like when you invert the image. Now, if you're like me and you're doing research, you just want to be focused on the images, and so I like to go into full screen mode. And there is another little insider tip that you'll get for coming to the session today. There are a couple of deficiencies or bugs when it's in the full screen mode. So those on-screen arrows no longer work in full screen mode. But you can use your left and right arrow keys on your keyboard. So you can go into full screen and stay there and just use your keyboard to navigate. Here we go. And you can leave the full screen mode by clicking up at the top, which is kind of cut off in the screen, it looks like. Oh, no, it's there. The expand arrows kind of change to a collapse arrow, or you can hit the escape key on your keyboard. All right, in the final portion of my presentation, I'm just going to highlight just a handful of digital collections that could be of interest to you. I've mentioned this a couple of times. This is a collection in collaboration with the Community of Christ. As you look at the finding aid on the left-hand side, you see some of the types of records that are here. Deceased membership files, early membership records, and early jurisdictional records, as well as the run of the Saints Herald as we saw. Here is yet another example of some of the collection of sacred hymns that we have, and this one, I've already forgotten which group this is with. Do you remember? Yes, Community of Christ. Yep, the Zion's Harp. In this collection, Stephen Post papers. We can see over on the right we have a good summary about what this is all about, and this deals in large part with Sidney Rigdon and his Church of Jesus Christ of the Children of Zion. And then here's an example. This is a manifesto from the Godbeites, and lastly is reminiscences from Orange Lysander White, Lyman White's son. Large manuscript here that he wrote a lovely memoir, reminiscences of their experiences, including quite a bit of what happened here in Texas. And now we'll introduce Tyson Thorpe.
Yes, so I'm Tyson Thorpe. I'm the reference coordinator of the Church History Library. So my chief responsibility is, those of you familiar with the libraries, it's reference work. So people come in with questions, emailing questions, and me and the members of my team do what we can to help answer their questions, or at least point them in the direction of collections and whatnot that might help serve their research. So first I want to talk a little bit about access, what that means at the Church History Library, because like was mentioned earlier, we are a corporate archive, and so because there are official kind of business records, there are some restrictions on some of those things, but others that we strive to make available. So the restrictions can be confidential material, sacred, private, a slew of other reasons, some of which you can see listed here. Sometimes a donor, when they give us something, they say it can't be made available while they're alive. Aspects like that kind of guide what we can or cannot make available at the time. Depending on the restriction, that will change. Like Matt mentioned last night, a council of 50 minutes for many years were not available until they then were. And so what we do is we have this policy, and then we, on the working with the public and as a department, we strive to do what we can to, within that policy, do what we can to help people with their research, make collections available. We are constantly digitizing more and more material, making that available online to researchers. So just to kind of highlight, like David was talking about with the catalog, there are some visual cues, as you can see here encircled there, open to research, closed to research, just to kind of give you a quick indication of what the nature of that collection may be, and if you might need to reach out and get some extra permissions or ask some questions when it comes to accessing something that might say closed to research. There we go. And David also hinted at some of the visual indicators on some of those. You'll see one that doesn't have any sort of colored bar or indicator. It's just open to research on the digital content. That's something that's, like he showed you with the Herald, it's just available. Anyone can view and can access. Ones that have the orange line and the little like exclamation point in the triangle, that means that it has controlled access. So it's something that we have digitized, but because of copyright, we can't just place it on the open web. So it's still available for people if they log in, which they can register for a free account and do so. Then they can have access because they're, by logging in, they're agreeing that they're not going to, print it out, throw it up on Amazon and start selling copies and infringing on that copyright. The blue line is something where it's open to research, but like it says here, it needs a request needs to be put in to have access. And that's typically when it's something where it doesn't violate any privacy laws, but it might be discussing some living individuals, and so we've just taken those extra steps to an extra security measure just to kind of protect those people's their information, so it's just not, again, on the open web. And then that last one is that protected access, where something is closed to research and extra permissions would need to be obtained to get access to that. And like it says there, it's filling out the Ask Us form, which David talked about earlier. And so with that, you can kind of get a visual here. Unconditional digital content, you can just already view, see that without any sort of login or anything. Then the controlled, you'll have that copyright restriction when you log in. That will be removed. And then limited digital content, where it will have this little indicator, the blue indicator, and then an option to request digital access to that item. And then once you are granted that access, you can log in again, and then it will be made available. So I've talked about Ask Us and kind of consultation. So the main role of our team is to orient people to the library, help them understand what the church history library is, kind of like what has been highlighted earlier, explain that to individuals, how they can do research at the library or online. We help them develop research strategies. I know this might not be the audience that experiences this, but we have many people that come in that have not done much in the way of research, besides maybe a Google search, that sort of thing. And so we help them kind of guide them through understanding what it is to do research in like a special collections in a library, understanding what our original source is and things like that. We also have many subject matter experts within the department. Mark Staker, who introduced us earlier, is one of those that we will often tap into when people come to us with questions, and sometimes connect them so that they can correspond and help provide answers, because our team, while we do have our own expertise, we can't be experts in everything related to the history of the Latter-day Saint movement. There's just too much going on, too much out there for us to be that, but we can connect them with those. We also help them navigate access, like I've just talked about, and then we have many items that are not digitized, but we do have a process to submit requests to have that done, and we can help them navigate that process and connect them with getting those content, making that content available online, since not everyone can come in to make the trip into Salt Lake City as easily to access that in our building. So that's a big part of what my team does. A lot of that is to connect through Ask Us or by just coming into the library and meeting with us. And you'll see right here on our main website, which I also forgot to put the URL, it is just churchhistorylibrary.org, churchhistorylibrary.org. And about halfway down the page, we have this little Ask Us icon, so people can reach out to us with questions wherever you are in your research process, with your experience, and we can provide guidance, assistance, however we can. We get questions from basics of when did this event happen, or where can I find information on this individual, to I'm working on my master's thesis and I need guidance on how to start doing research in your archives. So all across the board there. And this is what that form looks like. Kind of very simple, but it allows us to begin that correspondence where we can connect and get you the answer, point you in the right direction, or correspond more to determine how we can best assist and help there.
Thanks, Tyson. Okay, so David and Tyson shared a small sampling of the tools, services, and some of the collections that we hope that you'll utilize to help you push your research along. You can see that over the years, our department has collected some materials that were created by or relate to various branches of our Latter-day Saint family tree. Additionally, many of our collections created by Latter-day Saints from the Brigham Young branch, some diaries, correspondence, and scrapbooks, etc. They document moments or series of events where our paths have crossed and our various peoples have interacted. But my purpose is not to talk about the collections, but rather to talk about metadata. That is, the titles, descriptions, and tags applied by archivists, librarians, and registrars to the manuscripts, books, and artifacts that we collect and preserve. The Church History Department has inherited a long legacy of cataloging and organizational practices for our historical records. However, as in many professions, the terminology and the methodology change over time. So, my message today is a look backward and a look forward. We are actively cleaning up metadata from now dated methods and also looking to refresh our cataloging practices, specifically related to the branches of the Latter-day Saint tradition. So to launch into that, we're going to start just outside the library with the concept of taxonomy. Taxonomy as an exercise in organization. So in this slide, you see the introductory statement that precedes a list of names and brief descriptions of the Latter-day Saint branches highlighted in the book Open Canon. I'm going to read this. This short list is included here to help readers identify and distinguish among denominations within the Latter-day Saint tradition. We acknowledge that many of these churches see themselves as a continuation of the original church organized by Joseph Smith in 1830. Describing their formations based on when they were seen as a unique community is not intended as a rebuttal to their internal understanding of continuity. And then for more information on these and other Latter-day Saint denominations, we point to Steve Shields' work. Many of you are familiar with Divergent Paths of the Restoration. Fantastic volumes. So, when compiling this introductory material, we, the editors of the book, recognize that most Latter-day Saint expressions claim founding in 1830. So, how do we disambiguate the many different groups that often use the same or very similar naming conventions? We looked at the timing and the people associated with the establishment of each branch as a unique community. In essence, there's a foundation with Joseph Smith, and what I'm going to here refer to as secondary foundation. but it's not a battery, it's just my trigger finger. Thank you for running forward. Let's see, where were we? Yes. So a foundation with Joseph Smith, and then what I'm calling a secondary founding with a founder or founders. So with this approach, we intentionally couch the discussion outside of faith and continuity claims. Rather, we frame it as an exercise to consistently and fairly refer to the branches of the Latter-day Saint tradition that spring from our common foundation. On this slide, you see a couple of examples from Steve Shields' methodology in Divergent Paths. He uses the name of the church or the group associated with a date and location of its founding, followed by a founder or founders. He also employs a useful numbering system that helps to show the lineal relationships between branches. Can't say this enough. I highly recommend you looking at Shields' work. So, we're now going to shift gears and move into the library. So, taxonomy in a library setting. That's where we get the term authority control. So, in the library and archival trade, authority control is the process of establishing standardized names and index terms for use in archival and bibliographic description, and then to ensure their consistent application. Standardized names and terms are applied as access points or tags to catalog records that describe a given book, artifact, or manuscript collection. When standardized terms or authorities are applied consistently in a catalog of holdings of a library, archives, and/or a museum, the search and faceted aggregation of records is significantly enhanced. Okay, so now for the rest of the slide, we're going to focus on the ites for a minute. So, just as the Book of Mormon patriarch Lehi and matriarch Sariah, whose posterity broke into warring factions in the second generation, sibling Latter-day Saint branches have a long tradition of referring to each other in terms of ites. Strangites, Bickertonites, Whiteites, Rigdonites, Brighamites, Josephites, and on and on and on. Though these ite terms have sometimes been embraced and have not always been wielded as needles to prick the ears of the referred to other, they do maintain an edge of factionalism that many, including myself, find unpalatable. So, in the Church History Department, we've recently taken steps to begin a purge from our catalog and our cataloging practices the use of ites, and to move toward a taxonomy in line with the ideas that we've been talking about so far today. So, here you can see some examples of the former use of ite names in their standardized form from our catalog. The Church of Christ Hedrickites, Brewsterites, and the Church of Christ Rigdonites. Whereas on the right side is the new standardized form that utilizes the official name of the church followed by a parenthetical statement of the second founding, a date, and the name of the person associated with that second founding. So you can see that we move from Hedrickites to the Church of Christ beginning in 1863 with Granville Hedrick and with Brewer. And in the case of the Rigdonites, it's split into two to represent both of Sidney Rigdon's churches, the Church of Christ 1845 to 47, and the Church of Jesus Christ of the Children of Zion from 63 to about 84. So the next step in our IT purge is to look at titles and descriptions. Okay, so here's an example from our catalog. This is an image of the temple lot. You can see in our title, it's the temple lot, Independence, Missouri. But down here in our description, we say it's a view of a lot with Hedrikite Meeting House and Independence cityscape in the background. So this is another case where we want to go back in and redo how we've named our sister branch, the Hedrikites. Additionally, in addition to descriptions, we look at ites in titles. So here's another example. This is also a photograph, not yet digitized. So go ahead and, whoops, request it if you're interested in this one. But it's a photograph of Strangite sites at Beaver Island, Michigan, undated. And from the summary, it's a view of baptismal site and the Strangite printing office in St. James. So again, examples of where we want to go back in and redo what we've done in the past. The next step after purging ites is really well summed up in this statement from the Introduction to Divergent Paths. I really like what Steve Shields says here about his book. In this book, I avoid calling people or groups ites or ites, ite or ites, except in cases that have been self-designated. The word apostate or apostasy is not part of the vocabulary of this work. Likewise, schism, splinter, break-off, faction are not part of the vocabulary. The group's ministries and expressions stand on their own merits with their authority. While it is true and sometimes unavoidable that groups of people become factionalized or separate from their group or break with a leader, I have tried to use such expressions objectively rather than as labels. This is a good rule of thumb. This is a good way forward. I have not done a lot of searching in our catalog for usage of this kind of terminology, but I know it's there. The few searches that I've done, I want to go back through and look at the ways in which we've used this kind of terminology. And even though terms such as sect, schism, and have a long history as academic terms that can be used with precision to describe the development, change, and fracture within religious movements, the terms can and have been also wielded like clubs in a polemical exchange to designate the other as lesser. Therefore, when composing or revising descriptive metadata, we seek to employ potentially charged terms in a precise academic way and eliminate usage that is degrading or potentially degrading. Okay. So that concludes this portion of our presentation, where we talk about the catalog and the tools and the collections and some steps that we're taking to clean up the way that we describe materials related to the Latter-day Saint tradition. We're now going to move into the second phase of our presentation, where David and I have brief case studies to share with you of the kinds of research that can be done with collections in the church history department. So David.
Thank you. So if you can cue up the next deck. Okay. On July 20th, 1833, in Independence, Missouri, a violent mob stormed the printing office of the Church of Jesus Christ in Independence, Missouri. They destroyed furniture and property and then threw the printing press out the second-story window. Tensions had been mounting for some time, but this blatant attack in broad daylight was surprising and terrifying. The daughter of Bishop Edward Partridge recalled later that a few of the men came out of the building with their arms full of unbound pages from the unpublished Book of Commandments and threw them into the street. In a well-known historical incident, two young teenage girls, Mary Elizabeth Rollins and her younger sister Caroline, bravely ran into the street and recovered many of the pages and hid in a nearby cornfield. Less well known is the involvement of a young 20-year-old farmer from Kentucky who also risked physical harm or death to recover more of the printed pages. His name was John A. Taylor, therefore not the apostle. Taylor later recalled asking Bishop Partridge if he should attempt to recover some pages. Partridge warned that it would likely cost him his life. "I do not mind hazarding my life to secure some copies of the Book of Commandments," Taylor replied. He then snuck outside the log stable where some of the mob had gathered, ran his hand between the cracks, and retrieved a few pages at a time. A dozen men discovered him at this moment and surrounded him. Without giving any details, Taylor states that he feared being stoned to death, but that in a miraculous way he was preserved and managed to escape unharmed. Whether this experience was the foundation for a lifetime of religious conviction, or it merely galvanized an existing deep belief in the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, one can only guess. In any case, this episode is indicative of a man of deep religious convictions. Taylor saved precious documents and demonstrated by his actions that he was willing to live and die for the restored gospel. His actions testify that he was not afraid to act in unpopular ways to support his beliefs. In fact, his religious conviction was always stronger than majority opinion, family ties, or the fear of death. John A. Taylor was born in 1812 in Warren County, Kentucky, the oldest of 14 children born to William W. Taylor and Elizabeth Patrick. In the spring of 1831, William moved his family to Monroe County, Missouri, settling near a well-traveled east-west road across the state. Shortly after settling in Monroe County, they met missionaries en route to Jackson County, who stopped and preached in the home of Isaac Allred. And Alex Boss spoke of this morning on the Allred settlement. A few months later, in 1832, other elders stopped and preached and baptized many, organizing a large branch known from Kirtland to Jackson County as the Salt River Branch. While his family lingered in Monroe County, 20-year-old John traveled to Jackson County, where he experienced the mob violence spoken of in 1833. He then moved to Clay County with the majority of the Jackson County saints. Marrying Eleanor Burkett in 1834 in Liberty. The rest of John's large family and the Salt River Branch gathered to Clay County, Missouri in the fall of 1834, settling between two forks of the Fishing River. Then, when expelled from Clay County, they relocated to Caldwell County and then eventually were driven from Missouri altogether. Sadly, John's father, William, died in 1839 near Warsaw, Illinois, from illness relating to exposure and the hardships of crossing Missouri to find refuge in Illinois. Just prior to his death, William asked his wife and 14 children to gather around him. He enjoined each of them to rally around the priesthood and also, quote, secured a promise from each that they would not marry outside of the church, close quote. After establishing themselves in Nauvoo, John Taylor was among those called the Wisconsin Pineries. The winters were long and brutal. Supplies often ran out before they could be replenished in the spring. The settlers experienced, in the words of one settler, quote, the fatigues of hunger, wet and cold, in a rigid, inclement climate. These shared hardships, together with the charismatic leadership of Lyman White, forged a close bond among this group of pioneering spirits. By 1843, the prophet Joseph Smith decided to make the lumber camps permanent, and the settlers began to invest a little more effort into the settlement. Nevertheless, Lyman White's sights were already directed elsewhere. In a February 1844 letter to Joseph Smith and the 12, White and a small committee made known their plans to send an expedition from Wisconsin to Texas. And this was spoken of by Matt Groh last night. The committee was not shy about expressing disapproval with the actions of the saints and their leaders in Nauvoo. Quote, having also become convinced that the church in Nauvoo will not build the Nauvoo house according to the commandment, neither the temple in a reasonable time, we have it in our minds to go to the tablelands of Texas. Close quote. The letter concludes by stating that they will comply with the instructions of the officers of the church, but the tone of the letter indicates a willingness to not only make their own plans, but to go their own way. This letter and one other were dispatched to Nauvoo, where they were read and considered immediately upon receipt on March 10, 1844. Following the receipt of these letters, Joseph Smith created the Council of 50 for the purpose of making plans to leave Nauvoo and gather to a place where they could go and establish a theocracy. Present at this historic meeting were several members of the Wisconsin settlement, including Lucian Woodworth. Within a week, Woodworth was given a letter of introduction and dispatched to Texas, where he met with President Sam Houston and proposed a Mormon colony in the Republic of Texas. With preliminary approval, Woodworth returned to Nauvoo and reported in a special meeting of the Council of 50 on May 3, 1844. The result of the report and subsequent discussion of Woodworth's mission to Texas was an order for Lyman White to take a small group of people to Texas. Following the martyrdom, White began making preparations to leave, ultimately departing Nauvoo before the temple was completed. Following the deaths of Joseph and Hiram Smith, many of those who had been in Wisconsin opted to travel to Texas with Lyman White rather than follow Brigham Young in the westward migration to the Rocky Mountains. John A. Taylor and his growing family were among those that joined White, despite the fact that his mother, siblings, and their families all traveled west. In November 1845, White's colony entered Texas and would later build a series of mills in various locations. Their first permanent settlement, as we know, located along the Pedernales River, a few miles outside the German town of Fredericksburg, they called Zodiac. Like many other White followers, Taylor supported Joseph Smith III as the rightful leader of the church, and throughout his life, Taylor vocally opposed polygamy. In 1848, Lyman White wrote a letter to Mother Lucy Mack Smith. In it, he speaks glowingly of Joseph III's uncle William, and goes on to say, quote, to young Joseph we say, it is your privilege to take your father's place, close quote. White's opinions were frequently preached in the colonies, and his teachings concerning Brigham Young and the rightful place of Joseph Smith III had a strong influence on his followers. In fact, according to Melvin C. Johnson, quote, by a ratio of nearly 6-to-1, former Whiteite polygamists and monogamists alike reunited with the reorganization led by Joseph Smith III. The colonists' memoirs clearly reveal both their mutual dislike, if not their outright contempt, for Young and their commitment to Smith's sons, close quote. In 1850, the mill and much of the village of Zodiac were inundated, and a decision was made for the colony to relocate some 50 miles away along Hamilton Creek in Burnet County. Taylor took the opportunity to leave the group for reasons which are not known, and eventually moved to Utah Territory. So Taylor slowly made his way to Utah, where other family members had already settled. He paused for a few years in modern-day Oklahoma and Tahlequah, Indian Territory. But by March 1853, he was in Weber County, Utah. March 1855. He was in Weber County, Utah, where their 13th child, James Henry, was born in Slaterville. Although John was living near Ogden, Utah, close to family and other believers of the restored gospel, in his opinion, all was not well in Zion. When the reorganized church sent Apostle Edmund C. Briggs and Alexander McCord as the first missionaries to Utah in 1863, Taylor was one of the first baptized by Alexander McCord into the RLDS organization, along with fellow Whiteite Stephen Maloney and his family, just weeks after the missionaries' arrival. The RLDS missionaries experienced early success, despite strong opposition by Brigham Young. By the spring of 1864, they counted nearly 200 members along the Wasatch Front, including 30 in the North Ogden area where Taylor and Maloney lived. Taylor accompanied McCord throughout the season doing missionary work in the area. Whereas most of the RLDS converts of 1863 emigrated from Utah during the spring of 1864, Taylor remained. This pattern repeated itself every spring. Shield, in his history of the early RLDS missionary efforts in Utah, writes that Utah Mormons who converted to the reorganization and stayed to preach to friends and relatives, quote, were sometimes the object of the most intense persecution. Their former friends and neighbors now considered them apostates from the faith, close quote. Taylor and Maloney were among this number in the Ogden area. These next couple slides have a few quotes about some of the hardships that these early missionaries faced. Reports of RLDS missionary work in Utah were frequently published in the Saints Herald, and these give insights into some of the common challenges they faced during this period. It was difficult, for example, to gain access to public meeting places where they could preach, so missionaries resorted to meeting in the homes of sympathetic people. Those who did allow them to stay or preach in their homes were often cut off from the Utah church, ostracized socially, and their places of businesses boycotted. On occasion, violence and threats were leveled against the Josephites, but no deaths were ever reported. In all, it was not difficult to understand why, as soon as one was baptized, they would want to get out of this country as soon as possible, as one put it. In 1867, one missionary wrote of yet another outward migration of RLDS converts and remarked, "So you see, it is almost impossible to keep them in Utah after they unite with the church, and indeed they cannot remain without great loss." Taylor proved by his actions once again that he was not afraid to go against public opinion when his personal beliefs and convictions were at stake. Perhaps persecutions put him in a precarious economic situation. In any case, Taylor moved his family from Slaterville up the Ogden Valley to Eden to live near his father-in-law, George Burkett. According to the reminiscence of his youngest daughter, Amanda, "Father got the gold fever and wanted to go to California. We moved down and camped near the mouth of Ogden Canyon while the family prepared for the trip. Then Father decided to go to Montana." In 1864, Taylor moved his family to one of several mining towns to spring up after a strike of gold in Alder Gulch. Although he went to Montana for economic opportunity, Taylor used his time there to continue to preach the gospel of the Restoration. In an 1869 report in the Saints Herald, we see evidence of his continued fervor for the work. John Taylor of Nevada City, Montana Territory writes, "I think there could be a good deal accomplished in the territory in behalf of this work if we had one or two faithful elders to give themselves to the ministry." In 1873, Taylor returned to Utah. Several of his children had married during their time in Montana, and he now returned with only his beloved wife and two youngest children. In 1875, Taylor wrote to Joseph Smith III about the conditions of his family and neighbors. "My people are in a state of confusion. Darkness reigns among them. I have 7 sons. They are all alive. 4 of the 7 have gone into polygamy." His brothers and sons all thought John had strayed from the true gospel. However, Taylor went on to say, "I can't be reconciled to go and do as my 4 polygamous brothers." So he had 4 polygamous brothers and 4 polygamous sons. Newly settled in Harrisville, Utah, Taylor again expressed willingness to preach on behalf of the reorganized church, despite the urging of his immediate family. "If in your judgment you think I can do anything in honor to the cause of Christ, point out the station or post. Some will listen, and many will harden their hearts against the word of God," he wrote. John and Eleanor remained in the Ogden area until his death on February 7, 1896. RLDS apostle and historian Heman C. Smith spoke at his funeral in the Harrisville Meeting House. Throughout his life, Taylor showed by his actions that he was firm and true to his personal testimony of the restored gospel. Like others in his day, he participated in more than one faction or organization of the Church of Jesus Christ, following the death of founder and prophet Joseph Smith, connecting himself first to Lyman White and finally with the reorganization. The description Heman C. Smith gave of others like him certainly applies. And that's the quote on the screen. Many noble men, confident that the work was of God, were sure that somewhere among the factions the right and truth would be found. Hence, when disappointed in one faction, they would flee to another, only to begin again disappointed, and forced by conviction to seek again. John A. Taylor was such a man. He was a man of conviction. And here I have just a selected bibliography of some of the materials that I used in my research, not exclusively from the Church History Library, but drawing heavily from the materials there. And as you can see, most of these are available online digitally.
Okay, so our final set of slides. And then we want to do a quick check with Mark. What's our time looking like? Perfect, thanks. Okay, thanks, David. One other collection that I'm going to highlight. I'm actually going to highlight one letter in a collection in the Church History Library. It's the Stephen Post Papers, MS 1304. If you want to write down the number. So, in early 1856, Latter-day Saint seeker Stephen Post reached out to Sidney Rigdon, then living with his daughter's family in upstate New York. It was 12 years since the majority of Nauvoo saints opted to align with Brigham Young and the 12, following the martyrdom of Joseph and Hiram. It was 9 years after Rigdon's Church of Christ, organized in Pennsylvania, had crumbled. Rigdon was living in relative obscurity and appears to have been quiet on matters related to the Latter-day Saint movement. Correspondence between Post and Rigdon, particularly letters written in late 1850s, became the impetus for Rigdon's revival. In March 1856, Sidney Rigdon wrote to Stephen Post with a revelation calling him, in the Lord's voice, to, quote, a great work in assisting my servant Sidney Rigdon in preparing the way before me. In the ensuing years, Post would heed that call and become a devout follower, even a spokesman for Sidney Rigdon and his vision of the establishment of Zion. 8 years after their initial contact, Rigdon and Post would organize a new expression of the Latter-day Saint tradition, a church called the Church of Jesus Christ of the Children of Zion. But in the meantime, during those years preceding church organization, Post and Rigdon had a lively correspondence, of which only one side, Rigdon's, is extant. It is in this early correspondence that we encounter an excellent example of Sidney Rigdon's creative, revelatory exegesis of a biblical text that is also solidly framed within the Latter-day Saint context. Here's the context. Ezekiel chapter 37 has had a long run in Latter-day Saint teaching and apologetic literature. Our traditional interpretation points to verses 16 through 19 with its talk of sticks and writings in the hands of Judah and Joseph coming together. We view this as an example of biblical prophecy foretelling the coming forth of the Book of Mormon and its companionship with the Bible as scripture. Joseph Spencer has a superb article on this subject wherein he traces the origins of this Latter-day Saint interpretation and then makes a strong case for adjusting our view of the prophecy's possible meaning. So for this presentation, I've extracted some data from Spencer's article to set up a timeline that you see the first bit of on the slide. The June 1832 edition of the Latter-day Saint periodical, The Evening and Morning Star, is the earliest known reference to an interpretation connecting Ezekiel 37 with the Book of Mormon. William Phelps was the editor of the paper and was likely the author of the article. So, a question remains. Is he transmitting a teaching of Joseph Smith or someone else? Or is this his own interpretation of Ezekiel 37? For our purposes today, I'm going to refer to this simply as Phelps's interpretation. So, in that 1832 article in the Evening and Morning Star, after referencing Ezekiel 37, Phelps asks rhetorically, if the stick of Ephraim does not mean the Book of Mormon, what does it mean? 5 months later, in November 1832, Phelps draws an explicit connection between 2 Nephi chapter 3 and Ezekiel 37 and asks another rhetorical question, which he then answers. Who can mistake what Ezekiel meant? They are the Lord's reading sticks or records for the benefit of Israel. The bracketed term was in the original. Then 2 months later, in January 33, an Evening and Morning Star article makes a defense against a likely counter-argument to Phelps's interpretation. The common schoolboy ought to know that anciently they wrote on parchment for common use and rolled it around a stick. This argument trying to make an explicit connection between a stick and a record, or a record of Scripture, thus enabling Phelps to point to the Bible and the Book of Mormon. Now, for the second part of the timeline. It starts to move quickly after that. In 1 year later, in a January 1834 letter, John Boynton declared, quote, "For my determination is, with the stick of Joseph in one hand and the stick of Judah in the other, to labor diligently in this world." Here, the Phelps interpretation is stated without explicit reference to the Book of Mormon and Bible as being the sticks of Joseph and Judah respectively. It appears that even by 1834, Phelps's interpretation is well on its way to becoming the common interpretation among the saints. In 1836, Sidney Rigdon alludes to this interpretation in a recorded sermon. Then in 1837, we have Parley Pratt's seminal work, the highly influential Voice of Warning, which includes a version of Phelps' interpretation. And as with this whole timeline, I'm drawing from Spencer, Joseph Spencer, and Spencer here posits that after 1837, the Phelps interpretation becomes normative among the saints. In 1838, a letter from Joseph Smith to Stephen Post, the same Stephen Post we were referring to earlier, the prophet makes a clear reference to the Phelps interpretation. Then in 1841, a publication, Evidences and Proof of the Book of Mormon by Charles B. Thompson, includes a lengthy discussion and defense of the interpretation. Then I have one of my favorite images. In 1844, Parley P. Pratt produced a beautiful, bold broadside stating unequivocally that the Book of Mormon is Ezekiel's stick of Joseph taken from the hand of Ephraim. So it's against this backdrop, again set up by Joseph Spencer's great work, that we now move into the letter. October 17, 1858. From Sidney Rigdon to Stephen Post. I'm going to be reading from Rigdon's language so that you can get the feel of how Sidney delivers revelatory messages and inspiration. Quote, I wish to direct your attention to the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, where he is commanded to prophesy to the valley of dry bones. You will there see what is said about the stick of Judah and the stick of Ephraim becoming one in his hand, and that after that takes place, the two nations into which Israel has been divided should be taken and made into one nation. But in order to do this, the two sticks had to unite into one. This is what the Lord had been doing with me, Sidney Rigdon, for 11 years. He was making one book out of two, the Book of Mormon and the Bible. It has taken that length of time to get my mind so freed from the shackles of Pharisaic sectarianism that I might be enabled to see that wonder of all wonders and that marvel of all marvels done when the Lord got my mind prepared so that I could see them before my vision. He, this is still Rigdon, he, the Lord, melted the two books into one, the Bible and the Book of Mormon. The two books into one. The two sticks were not more clearly made one stick in the hands of the prophet Ezekiel before his eyes than were the two books made one book before my mind. But now for what followed, I gazed at this in awe. A striking scene more like a statue. I gazed at this awe-striking scene more like a statue than a living man till the books were perfectly united. That being done, a greater wonder, if possible, immediately followed. Sidney loved to do this. Lo, here comes another Bible, out of the mass into which the two were combined, and this Bible was neither the one nor the other, but a Bible which it took both to make. I will here give you a very common, Sidney Rigdon continued, I will here give you a very common figure to assist you in understanding this extraordinary event. Metaphor. Quote again. Let your wife take grease and try to wash her clothes with it, and she will fail. Let her then try it with lye, and she will fail. But let her put these two together, put them over a fire till they combine, and then she has a something which will wash clothes. But it is neither lye nor grease, but is produced by combining them together. So it is with this Bible. By these I have learned that a real or pretended priesthood may as well try to wash clothes with lye or grease separate as to try to gather Israel with the Book of Mormon and the Bible separate as we have them. This new Bible the Lord has put into my mind and has written on my heart, for it never was on paper, so that at home or abroad, in the field or by the way, I can read. I'm going to reread that last sentence. This new Bible the Lord has put into my mind and has written on my heart, for it never was on paper, so that at home or abroad, in the field or by the way, I can read it. It contains many things that cannot be read in either of the books, and that matters of eternal consequence for us to know. It is in this Bible is given the history of our race as it is in the sight of heaven, and continues that history to the end of the world. It gives the history of the future so plainly and so perfectly that the events seem to be passing directly into view. By it, darkness is taken off of subjects which were so mysterious as to defy the research of the most profoundly learned in the ages and generations. Thanks, Mark. So what do we make of this letter? For me, when I read this, it was a little surprising. This is a new take on what has been a very common interpretation of Scripture in the Latter-day Saint tradition. I haven't seen this kind of take before. I'd be really interested if anyone here has. What do we do with this? It appears that Rigdon is saying that his heart and his mind constitute this new Bible. So in a way, a living Scripture. Or as in the title, the incarnation of Scripture. I confess I'm not sure exactly what Sidney Rigdon is doing here. It seems plain from this one letter, but what I'm inviting here today is exploration. So I'm intentionally leaving this message short and not going on to try to answer these questions. I want to encourage you to come to the Church History Catalog, come to our library, explore sources like what David did, and explore sources like the Stephen Post collection to see what we can learn about the greater Latter-day Saint tradition from the records that we house in our department. So, with that, it's question time. And I can't see. You can see. This is a great question. I'm going to repeat the question. So the question is about, so when it comes to images of text, we want to talk about OCR, optical character recognition. This becomes a lot more difficult with handwriting, but I'm going to defer this question to David.
The short answer is, yeah, it's great stuff. We actually have been exploring this for some time. We have plans on our roadmap to include both optical character recognition, which is for typewritten materials, as well as handwriting recognition to make full text transcriptions and full text searchable our materials. We don't have a specific timeline yet for when that will be, but it will be in my lifetime. How's that sound? Just around the corner. One more question?
So the question is about UI design in the catalog. Great question. This is another David question.
I could talk for another hour. I'll give you another short answer on that. So we do quite a bit of user research or audience needs research, both for our internal users as well as our external users, to understand what their needs are when it comes to the catalog. That's not a one and done thing. It's cyclical. We are constantly refining and creating new ways of letting our users interact with that, with our catalog tool. we always have to balance that with, as we're developing new tools, with refining existing tools. And so typically I'm not a very patient person. Hopefully people think that I am, because I don't, anyway, I'll just leave it at that. We have a lot of plans for improving that and adding new technology, but we're always looking for feedback from our users, sometimes through formal surveys. If you want to talk to me afterwards, I'm happy to give you my contact information. Some people in the department like to see if they can come up with an idea that I haven't already heard before, and so I give you that challenge as well. And there's also on the bottom right corner or on the bottom edge, there's a feedback tab where you can put in feedback that comes to me. So anyway, there's lots of different means we use to get feedback and kind of put that back into the loop for our development. Thank you for the question.
Okay, so it's 4 o'clock. That concludes our session. Thank you for coming and listening.